Welcome to A Learner's Journey. My name is Molly Sanders, and the goal of this podcast is to inspire and motivate you by connecting you with a variety of passionate horsewomen and men who have dedicated their lives to helping horses and their people. I'm grateful you're here. Welcome to the latest episode of the podcast. Today, you're going to get to hear a conversation that I had with Dr. Susan Fay. She's the author of a fabulous book called Sacred Spaces, and after I read the book, I was very intrigued to talk to her and was lucky enough to have her say yes. She has a rich knowledge base backed by years of research and experience. But when I think about what she does, to put it into simple terms, it's helping us to make small changes in ourselves that can have profound implications for our horses. There are a couple things I want to let you know about the interview you're about to hear. We did this interview several months ago, and before we did the interview, Warwick Schiller had just put on a wonderful event for his podcast where he invited folks that had been on his podcast previously to what was called the Journey On Summit. And I asked Susan about this because she's one of the people that was invited to present at the summit, and I asked Susan about the event. So you'll hear me refer to that. That's what I'm talking about. And then one other thing, we will have a guest that joins in on the interview about midway through, and it is Rue, my dog. One of the things that I've gotten pretty good at is hitting the mute button at certain times, and I missed it. And you're going to hear her basically howling a couple times. And so she had some things she wanted to share as well. I'm happy you're here. I think you're going to love the conversation. So you recently participated in the Journey On podcast summit that happened this November. It sounded like a fabulous event, and I was curious to find out what stood out for you about that experience.
What stood out for me on that was the level of enthusiasm that people had and that hunger they had for finding some new ways to interact with their horses and to do training and to really work on themselves also. So it was just this wonderful thing of like exploring outside of the box that we've always been put in with horses. And the other part that kind of stood out for me was the level of acceptance and vulnerability that was shown by not only the people that were speaking, but the audience. And, you know, there was that camaraderie that was going on.
That's wonderful.
So I think that's what really impacted me.
Yeah, that's great. And do you feel like, I mean, you've been doing this for a while. Does it feel like there's something happening that's new? Or is it just like, I'm wondering if it feels to me like it is kind of a new thing, that people are embracing this idea that it really is me that needs to improve, you know, before I can ask my horse to improve. And do you feel like there's just a bigger acceptance of that, or what's happening?
And I do. And what was interesting about the summit was that there were no horses there. We were not doing horse demos. We were talking about just what you said about what do we do as humans? How do we change?
Right.
And I mean, I think that is, for most of my lifetime with horses, you may be the same. It's like there was very little focus or anything ever mentioned to me about what I should do differently as a human.
Right.
No, it was like, make the horse do this. You have to learn this skill set.
Yeah.
And that was my job, was to learn how to do the rope skills, how to do the riding skills, how to, you know, those kind of physical things.
Right.
But it was almost like, well, the horse has to just deal with who you are.
Right. There wasn't, like you said, there wasn't really even any thought that was a part of it.
No.
You know? Yeah. If you can ride and do the ropes and all that stuff, everything should be fine.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Really
And
cool. So we're definitely going to dig more into this topic as we go. But I wanted to see, how that went for you. But I'm really curious to hear a little bit about your story and how you got to where you are today. So will you tell us a little bit about like the beginning, like how did you get involved with horses?
I like very a lot of people, I guess, that find themselves addicted to horses. It starts, and it's something that you can't really put your finger on. But I can only remember from the time of my first memories it was about horses. It was an obsession about everything horse related. And even my father, I saw him in Thanksgiving. He said, "Oh yeah, I think you learned to talk at 2 years, when you were real little, only to ask questions about horses." And so I think it's really funny that my parents did not like horses, of course, and we're totally ignorant about anything to do with horses. And when we moved to the mountains, I was about 8 or 9 years old, and I probably pestered them so much that they're like, "Yes, we'll get you a horse."
Right.
And thank goodness it was the 30-year-old horse that had been through every kid in the valley. So it wasn't that, "Oh, we'll get you a young one so you two
Right.
can grow together." No, it was at least they made that decision.
Mm-hmm.
And there was very little where I was growing up where you got instruction. It was like, "Oh, well, there's only a few things you have to know: kick to go, pull back to stop, pull this way to turn that way." There was very little instruction.
Right.
And somehow I goofed around with the horse and rode up and down the mountains and didn't have a problem. But that's probably because I was a kid and had the kid brain.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And is this all happening in Colorado? Did you grow up
Yeah.
in Colorado? Oh, wow. So you've been in that state your whole life.
Pretty much, after graduating from high school, there were no jobs, so I went to Florida for a while and
Okay.
found
Okay.
my way to the East Coast for a while, and then back to Colorado.
Okay. So you were this horse crazy kid, like many of us. I think many people watching and listening totally relate. And that story that you told, I love that. But, really the only reason you learned to talk was so you could ask about horses. That's so great. So when did you start to get this idea that maybe this would be something that you do professionally?
I had wanted to do that professionally from the time my first memories, but I had the parents who were practical, and they said, "You know what? You can't make a living that way. You can't make a living doing this." So it became my hobby on the side,
Mm-hmm.
when I was doing the real world things that I was supposed to do. But there was always that study and that immersion in the horses as much as I could.
That's wonderful. That's
Yeah.
wonderful. And what was the practical thing that what road did you go down for the practical thing?
The funny thing is, I became an environmental scientist.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And it was funny because back then, this was a long time ago when I was, in school. So
Uh-huh.
early 80s, I'm in college. I'm the only woman in every one of my science classes.
Wow.
And they didn't even call it environmental science back then. They called it land use. So my
Oh,
my first undergraduate degree is in land use, and then I got a master's in environmental science. But it was kind of that same, a lot of the principles that go into like the environment and ecosystems and that kind of thing apply to horses, apply to ranching, and which I ended up doing later.
mhm.
So there were all these pieces of that um, profession and the way that you think within that profession about connection and how things affect each other that I took into the horse world with me when I
Interesting.
really immersed in that end.
Right, right. And for those people that maybe don't know who you are, I think a lot of people listening and watching know who you are and maybe have read your book. But for those that don't know, you've written this wonderful book called Sacred Spaces. And I love the subtitle. It's Communion with the Horse Through Science and Spirit. So as you're talking, I didn't know that your background was in environmental studies, but it makes sense. And like you said, it's about the interconnection, of the species, but of nature. And then that's kind of where you went with horsemanship too, which is fascinating to me. And I also really appreciate your science background in the book, which we'll talk a little bit more about as well. So what are you doing with people now? How are you helping people now?
It's interesting that, maybe I have the opportunity to do some really big kind of clinic and things like that. But what I've really wanted to do is stay in that relational place where everything that I do is like a one-on-one, because a lot of the stuff that I do cannot be experienced or taught in a big setting with a lot of people and a lot of horses, a lot of activity. And so my thing now is really helping individual people with their own horse. And how do we create a better relationship there? And how do we I don't want to say diagnose, or how do we explore some of the behavioral things that are going on with the horse in light of the energy, in light of, where is that horse's life taken it? What experiences has that horse had? What experiences have you had? And what are your skill levels? And putting all of those things together, it's like an ecosystem essentially.
Right,
These ecosystems, which is the horse and its owner, or the
right.
person that takes care of it, and really, like, how can I make the healthiest ecosystem for those two, where
Interesting.
they can work together?
Interesting. So, with your book, uh, you really, in the beginning of the book, I really appreciated one of the things I really appreciate about your writing is that you write in stories and you share stories throughout the book, which I think is so powerful, because it's one thing to read an explanation of something, but then a whole nother to hear, it relayed in a story that we can relate to. And so in the beginning of the book, you shared this really amazing story about really how a shift happened in your own life about what's possible with horses. And would you be okay if I read a little piece of it? And
Absolutely.
okay, cool. And then if you would maybe share the rest of the story, and then how what was the change? What did you learn through this
Okay.
story? So my whole body was shaking uncontrollably. Waves of fear and sorrow traveled down the lead rope I was holding in my trembling hand. At the end of the rope stood a beautiful red gelding. My storm of emotions appeared to have no effect on him whatsoever. Peering into his beautiful, soft brown eyes, it seemed that he was trying to calm me down. He was trying to calm me down, like I was the one with a problem. I wondered if he was in shock or just too tired to fight any longer. Or maybe he knew that he couldn't escape his fate, and he was waiting patiently for death to rescue him. So an incredible, incredible opening scene. This is the beginning of the book. I'm like, oh my gosh, where am I going?
Oh my
And
gosh.
yeah, so can you share with us what happened, and
Yeah.
what effect? I mean, what did you learn?
Oh, and it's interesting that even as you read that, I had that emotional reaction to it. It took me right back there into that feeling of this hopelessness that I had, that I couldn't help this horse. And he was stuck in a cattle guard. He had gone through it during, we had a bunch of snow, and then I guess he tried to walk over and then just sunk in, and then he was stuck. And I'm there, and I'm like, it's just me. I can't do anything. And the person was with me. There's no way we're going to get him out of there.
Right.
And so I thought at that moment, like, what could I do other than just hold a space for him and just be there for the last bit of time he had? And at that time, I mean, I had dabbled in the idea, like, we could communicate with horses in other ways, we could make pictures, we could do those things, but I thought that was reserved for other people. Like, I would pay somebody to connect with my horse and tell me what it was thinking. I didn't really truly understand that I was doing that all the time, and that I could actually do that.
Right.
And this is where this takes me, when I go, okay, I'm going to go through my Rolodex of things to do, and all I could think of was, I'll make a picture, a little movie of how he could get himself out of there safely.
Mm-hmm.
And I just started closing my eyes and thinking of that movie. And to the astonishment, it was so odd to actually see him do the thing that I pictured
Right.
and find his own way out of that predicament. And I remember when the person that was helping me, she had gone to make a phone call because of course you don't have cell service down there in the middle of the valley,
Right.
and it took her quite a while. And I remember her leaving, and it's like, we're going to get a gun. I mean, there,
Yeah.
you can't get a vet down there. I mean, we're
Right.
in the middle of nowhere, Colorado,
Right. And
right?
it's
So
freezing, right?
it's
Wasn't it super
freezing.
cold? Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like, oh, I just don't want to do this tonight. You know, you don't want to see that happen.
Right.
And she kind of left with that a little bit of like resignation that, oh boy, this is what we've got to do.
Right.
And it was so interesting. I think the most baffling thing for me was that when he got out, and he was standing there, and I looked at him, and he had one little tiny scrape of hair missing off of his back leg. I'm
Hmm.
like, this is crazy.
Right.
And he's standing there. He was shivering because he'd been in there all day, and I think he was a little in shock. And she drives up at that point, and he's standing. We're standing outside the cattle guard together. And when I wrote in the last part of that story, it's like the humans said nothing. I don't think anybody could reconcile what happened or how that happened,
Right.
because that was impossible.
Hmm.
And so, you know, like people do in those situations, they don't say anything.
Hmm.
They just pretend like, well, that didn't happen. You know,
Hmm.
we'll just go on and just
Right.
pretend like that never happened,
Right.
never to be spoken about again. But that particular incident, when I believed that other people could do it, but I didn't think I could, that was the shift in me, like, oh my gosh, everybody can do this. And we put limitations on ourselves because we say, oh, well, that person can speak to animals, or that person has that gift. That was what propelled me to start to study, like, what is it that happened? How did it happen? How
Right.
can I replicate that?
Right.
And so, you know, when you talk about pivotal moments in your life and what propels you onto a different path, that was one of the things.
Yes. And I love what you're saying, for so many reasons. But one of the things, for me, because I've always had a skepticism about, um, animal communication, calling somebody in another state and explaining things, and they're able to, I've always been skeptical of that. I've always felt like, well, there's so much we don't know, right? There's so much we don't understand. So I haven't just said it's absolutely impossible, but I'm close. I've always been kind of close to that. But I've had experiences not as dramatic as what happened for you and that red gelding, but I've had experiences where I felt like horses have understood where I was at, or have done things that I've been picturing. So I know that there's something to it, but the thing that I really appreciate about your journey is like what you just shared, that you took it on. You were like, that was so earth shaking for me, and I want to understand what happened. I want to understand what's behind it. And then you took your science background. So this whole book is this wonderful combination of, you explain the science behind certain things, and then you share, the stories, and then you also help people, with practical applications of
Mhm.
how they can practice things and make these things happen for themselves. So I'm
Yeah.
totally hooked, and
Oh,
I'm so appreciative that you've done this, because
oh,
I really have been, skeptical, but the way you've written it, I'm like, this makes sense to me, and I can apply these things. So can you share a little bit about, like, one of the things that I thought was so interesting, we kind of hear about these days, is the different brains.
mhm.
Um, what is that like? So you talked about the three different brains. What is that, and how could knowing that help people with their horses?
You know, it's interesting when I was going through, like, what are all the things that affect what we're talking about, like all the science and everything, and I'm going down these different pathways. And as a health researcher, which was what I was doing psychology and health research, and it took me into these places like that. Wow, oh wow, there's actual science behind all of these things, and I'm like, why isn't that out there in a bigger way? And how could that, my brain's always, how could that apply to my horse world and
Right.
what I do with horses?
Right.
Um, so the whole idea about the three brains is that we have a gut brain, a heart brain, and then the brain in our head. And scientists consider these distinct brains in the terms of that, because what they're doing is they have their own nervous system independent of each other. And they are able to take in information, sensory information from the environment, and process it and then send it up to the main brain. If they think it, that happens unconsciously, whatever what we're doing. But our body is always getting sensory information in, processing it, deciding if it's relevant or not relevant, and then the stuff it thinks is relevant it'll send to our conscious mind for us to take action with.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that we as humans for so long have shut off our emotional, that's the heart brain is the emotional center.
Mm-hmm.
And all that emotional information we're kind of told as humans, don't be emotional, don't, that shows you're weak or something. No, that gives you a lot of information.
Right.
And the gut brain is about telling us whether we're in danger or not. It's a very primitive brain. It says yes or no. You're in danger, you're safe. You're in danger, you're safe. And
Mm-hmm.
people, they talk about it all oh, I had a gut feeling I was gonna, like, I shouldn't do that. And then it's like, but then they ignore it.
Right.
So a lot of what I'm trying to teach people is listen to your heart brain, listen to your gut brain. It's giving you vital information about your interaction with your horse. And guess what? The horse doesn't work very much in the brain when we
Right.
start analyzing and thinking and doing all that human stuff up there. Horses go, that's just static.
Right.
They're working from the emotional center, the feeling center in the body,
Mm-hmm.
more
Right.
than they are from what we're going to think our way through something.
Right. Or the gut.
Or the gut.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you're sharing this, I think it is interesting in the horse world how it is. I mean, in the human world, in the adult world, it's kind of we're taught to put those emotions away. But then you take the little microcosm of the horse world, and we're really taught that, right?
Yeah.
Don't let them see you be fearful, and get back on, and all those little messages that we're given to put on our big girl pants or whatever the things
Right.
you hear, and it does convey don't listen to those things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think this was a question that had come up during the summit. Is somebody said, can you fool your horse with an emotion? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
no, you can't.
Mm-hmm.
Because they are so much about getting sensory information and evaluating emotional and feeling
Right.
information from their environment. And
So
so, no,
can
you
you talk
can't.
can you talk a little bit about that? Because one of the things I thought was really interesting, the way you presented in the book, where if someone is having emotional distress, they can be around a horse that is centered and not, right? We've all had this experience where we've gone and cried on our horse's shoulder or whatever, and we've felt this calmness. Can you share a little bit about what's going on there and how that can work, but then also how, if you don't have a horse that's centered, what that can look like?
Oh, this gets into a big topic, but I'll try to condense this down into, kind of an easy thing. And then I think later on I'll touch a little bit about, there was another question you had where I'll touch about what happens when a horse has been exposed to a lot of trauma in its own life.
Okay.
So we will go on that journey a little bit later here. But what I've noticed, like with the horses that I trained and were at my ranch, and it's like I'm with them every day, and they're seeing all that interaction, and everything is like out there. They know who I am. They see me every day, and it's like I have a bad day, they come and soothe me. It's like they can pick up on that. but I'm honest with it. Sometimes I would say, or I'd go out and go, I'm not feeling the greatest today. And it's interesting how they would come over and try to soothe,
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing that other end of the spectrum is like we have a lot of anxiety and we don't want to address it, or we have a lot of something going on in our life, emotional, and we don't want to address it, and we think we can suppress it and go out and interact with the horse, and the horse is going, yeah, you're just a little off today.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure I want to interact with you. And the
Right.
people are going, but I don't understand. I'm doing all the physical thing. No, he can feel there's an energy signature, there's an energy frequency that gets transmitted out of you when you're having different thoughts and emotions. And the horse is reading that energy and
Right.
saying, that person's safe. I don't think I want to be around that person today.
Right.
And so, really in a lot of the work that I do with people one-on-one is having them become aware of what is the energy you're emitting from your body right
Mm-hmm.
now,
Mm-hmm. Right.
having awareness of that. And what is the effect on your particular horse? Because like you said, some horses can deal with that, some horses cannot.
Right.
And so you've got to kind of know, wow, I'm dealing with a really sensitive horse, and that really sets him off when I start getting anxious or doing this, worrying and all this kind of stuff. Maybe I need to take some steps to kind of stop that.
Right. And what's something that someone could do if they know they realize that they recognize that they're, more anxious or they're having more emotion that day? What's something that they could do to help?
Uh, and this gets into, some of the things that I teach, but one of my foundational things, there's a couple things that I want people to do is like, there's a certain type of breathing that I'm going to do. I don't think I really go through it in depth in my book.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this awareness of your own body. And what is your body communicating? What are you feeling in your body? Because that's when I take people into like a place of awareness, and what energy are you transmitting? It's all about, can you scan your own body? Can you notice how your body feels right now? And do you want your horse to feel the way you're feeling right now?
Right.
If you check yes, then keep doing that. But if you're having anxiety and you're, tense somewhere and you're holding it, I ask him, do you want your horse to feel that way? Because he's going to mimic that. And then the way that we work on those things is through awareness. Oh, scanning my body, I felt the tension come up. Everybody will have a different place where they'll feel anxiety or something come up, and I want them to be aware of that. And then what we do then is go to this breathing technique that I do, which is very simple, to ground you and reset your body, to bring you back into presence, to slow down your brain, to make you more relaxed, and to start to emit to the horse an energy that says safety and comfort
That's wonderful.
rather than anxiety. Be
I
honest.
love that question of would you want your horse to feel this way? That's a powerful question. Because it really does cause somebody to go, okay, I do have a responsibility here, and I want to change.
Yeah.
So that's really great. That's really good. So one thing I wanted to ask you about is I'm almost done with the book. And one of the things that I've already put into practice is the visualization. And you talk about the productive contemplation. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Um, yeah, it's interesting where as a researcher and scientist, it's like when you get into academia and you're in there, it's like, how complicated can we make everything?
Right.
How big, what big words can we use? And how can we make this so complicated that nobody could actually do it? Excuse me. And then as a researcher, going back into practical application of research, I'm like, nobody can do those complicated things. How could I take information about the science and look at it and then figure out an exercise that we could do that would make that so simple that somebody could actually apply it every day easily?
Yeah.
without like a big long list of things you had to practice. And here's where it gets into, I've done meditation in my life, and I'm thinking, well, most horse people say I don't have time for that.
Right.
So what I did was I took the breathing method that I just was talking about. That's a form of meditation. And what people have found is that in just like 2 or 3 minutes, they can be present, slow their brain down, relax their body, you know, feel really, really grounded in just 2 minutes versus, and they've said this, it's like, wait, I've done traditional meditation for hours and I've never experienced this feeling I felt in 2 minutes of doing that breathing
Mm-hmm.
method. And so that is what I'm trying to do is I want all these things to happen physiologically, emotionally, mentally, all these psychologically. How can I have that happen in a simple way, in a fairly quick way that people could apply? So
Right.
this is essentially what the productive contemplation is. It's a way to meditate, but you can do it with your eyes open. And it's a practice where you start to train your brain to go through and replay a scenario or create a scenario before you actually do it. And it can happen, you can make them really short, like a minute, less than that. Like, let's just say I might do productive contemplation and decide I want to go saddle my horse for the first time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stay in my breathing and I'm going to imagine using my visualization skills. I'm going to imagine the saddling process and I'm going to imagine myself going through it. I'm going to see where there might be a little glitch in the system, and so what it does is it starts to create this thing in my conscious mind where, oh, you already did it. This is what you do all the time. And it trains your brain to go, oh, when you make a little picture, that's what you want me to do? Yes. So
Right.
you're going to find with the productive contemplation that the more you practice these just little short scenarios, like I'm going to go build this thing, what tools do I need? And you imagine assembling all your tools and then you go through the process of building something real easy and then you go, oh, I should have got that other tool. I needed that other thing. So it's really helping your brain start to go, here's all the things you need to accomplish your task. So it helps you become more focused and more, like on one topic. If you're all over the place all the time, when you do the productive contemplation, you're having to focus on one task and completing that one thing. So you're training your brain to stay focused on one thing.
That's
Um,
great. I love it. And I love it because I think that we already do it, but we
mhm.
usually do it to the negative.
Oh,
Right? We
exactly.
usually play the story and it's, oh, this is going to happen and this is going to happen. And it reminded me of that. And as I was reading it, I was like, wow, this is really cool because you're talking about having more control of, of creating the story that you want and
Exactly.
spending time on it. And then you went into talking about the science behind visualization and how powerful it is, and it's been proven over and over and over
Yeah.
throughout all different sports, and that it really does work. It's not just this thing out in the air. It it
Right.
it it really is based in science. So I think that's really great. That's already helped me. I've been doing little bits and pieces of it, and I've felt a difference
Yeah.
in with me. So really great. Um, so what, as you I love that you get to work with people one-on-one with their horses. And throughout the time that you've done that, you've probably noticed some patterns that people have, and that can kind of get in their way with their horses. What's something that you've noticed that is an obstacle for progress with people, and then something that you could share to help them?
When I get into, because I'm talking in a place where there's not a lot of people that have talked about energy and horses, and so what's happening with a lot of people is that I see getting in their way is that belief system. It's like, no, that can't happen. No, I couldn't do that. I'm not good at that. so those self-limiting beliefs are what really stop people from achieving some things. And the other thing that I see is also this programming, and I got programmed too about in the horse world. It's like, don't let that horse get away with that. It's being rude. It's doing that. All of these things that you were told time and time again for decades, right? That a lot of this was programming over decades of the horse does that thing and that means that, and you have to correct that right away. And I see them struggling with this because I'm going to tell them when they're out there that horse has a particular behavior. Let's just say it's coming in your space. So the first thing that I was taught was like, get that horse out of your space. It's rude. Got in your space.
Right.
I'm going to ask the people to evaluate, why is that horse in your space? What do you think is causing that horse to need to be in your space? And to look at it in a more complex way. Like, there's most of the time when I find that is that the horse is super insecure and it's looking for some kind of reassurance, and it doesn't have a big skill set to go, oh, well, I could handle that better. It doesn't know how to get its needs met.
Right.
And so I'm out there going, okay, I could experiment with this and see if that might be true. Like, he's really insecure. And what I'm going to do, this going to kind of be jumping ahead, but how I use the energy is like, I'm going to model for him what it would feel like in my body if I have this soft confidence. Like, I could do that. I got this. I'm grounded. I'm secure. And so what I have people do is then create that feeling in their body. Can you create that feeling? Can you model that for your horse? So I'm going to be breathing. I'm going to be holding that feeling in my body of what it feels like to be softly confident. And it's amazing to watch those horses change. You don't touch them. You don't do anything. They relax. They go, oh, I never would have thought of feeling like that. We can't expect that they could pull a skill set out of the ethers and apply it, but we could model something for them. Here's how I'm dealing with this situation. You could try that. So they're going to pick up the energy from you and go, hey, I'm feeling better. I don't feel like I need to be on top of you now.
Right. That's really interesting.
So things like that.
Yeah. Do you find that in that scenario in particular, do you find that it's partly also because the person hasn't had that quiet, like you're saying, that confidence, that they're kind of fearful or whatever, and so the horse is kind of coming in and they're feeding off each other?
Oh, absolutely. And when I told you at the beginning, I'm working at things like it's the whole ecosystem together. It's not just the horses thing. When I ask people to, especially a lot of times with the confidence, soft, I always put soft in front of it because I don't want bravado confidence. I'm going to run over the top of everybody. No, I want it to be like, I know who I am. I know where I'm going. I know I can get it done. So therefore, I can be relaxed and soft.
Right.
That's my soft confidence. But what I'm finding is a lot of people can't do that in their own body.
Right.
They've never had a plane or something they've done that they felt that way. And so my question to them, when we go through these different things, what does a horse need? If we expect the horse to be able to exhibit a behavior that we cannot do ourselves, that's not fair.
Right.
It's like, I figure my job is to learn enough about myself and create these places where I can be a model for how do I deal with this situation.
Right.
And then the horse learns.
Yeah. So there's a couple things going on in my head. And one of them is that idea of if we can't do it ourselves, because so often you'll hear about connection, relaxation. Those are two big things that you hear a lot. I want my horse to be connected. I want them to be relaxed. And sometimes I'll see people that are saying those words quite a bit, and they're neither one, right? They aren't connected at all. They're talking about all these different things. and they're not relaxed. They have so much tension in their body, but they're holding their horse accountable to those things. So I think that's so good for people to consider, like, that we need to create that in ourselves in order to help our horses with it. That's so good. And then the other thing that popped into my mind is horses, see what you think about this, that in my observation, horses find this with the herd. They find it with each other, but that when they come into the human world, that's where, like the example you were giving of the horse that's invading space, and that they didn't know that that feeling was possible. Is it that they didn't know that feeling was possible with people?
Um, I think
Okay.
a lot of times, because we are very energetically complicated. I can't even imagine what a poor horse does when they see a human coming, like, whoa, that's just like static.
Right.
It's like all this stuff going on and blah. But the more we become focused, that's what the productive contemplation is for. More you can like focus in and decide, this is how I want to be, this is how I want to feel, and then watch what the horse does in response to that. When you can hold that, they become like, oh, you're one of us.
Right.
And what I'm finding is the whole idea of connection. I talked a little bit about this as my topic at the podcast summit, that everybody's like, I want connection, I want connection. And I asked this in my talk. It's like, so what is connection? Connection in and of itself means nothing. That can mean you're standing next to somebody, you're touching somebody, but it doesn't define the qualities of that connection. And so that's where the horse world, with the idea of connection as the big word, it's like, but what, nobody knows what that means. And then when I ask people, what do you mean by the connection, what they get to, and that's why I use the word communion in the title of my book, they're looking for that deeper feeling of heart to heart, mind to mind, spirit to spirit communion.
Right. Right.
Which is way different than connection.
Yes. Yeah.
And again, if you can't do that yourself with another human, or even within your own body, to feel communion with your own body, what are my thoughts, what are my feelings, what are my emotions, how could you create that between another being?
Right. Yeah. And one of the things that you talk about early on in the book, and I think it's when you're delving into that idea of the three brains, and you talk about, and I might not get the terms right, but the waves, the alpha waves and the beta, or a bunch of the Greek word waves.
Yes.
And you were talking about that you can simply, like, to get to the kind of waves that horses respond positively to, that you can simply think about something that brings joy to you, or a time when you felt safe, and think about that, like maybe before you go to get your horse, or if you're having trouble in the arena, maybe going out and just thinking about one of those times, that can change your brainwaves, or your,
Yes.
yeah. And that they can, they'll respond to that. And I think that's just, it's so simple, but it's such a powerful thing. Is there anything else that you would want to share on that topic?
I think I just want to share, because, I did go into, in the book, I talked about the different brain waves and the frequencies. And, for the people that get into science and all that, they're like, ooh, I love this, I wonder what frequency I'm doing. And they'll get all obsessed with that. And that's making them get in that analytical part of their brain. You can't take that into the relationship with the horse. So the way I'm having people figure out what is the frequency, it doesn't really matter what it is. What matters is, what is the effect it has on your horse when you do that particular thing.
Right.
And so we're going to define those things by the way they feel in our body. How do we feel right now? And so each energy, like if you were going to do safety, or if I was going to do confidence, those two things have distinctly different feelings in my body. I will not. I love that. See, it's like, yes, finally.
Yes, my
That
dogs
was
are
perfect
playing.
timing.
My dogs are playing at my feet.
Oh, that's so funny. Oh, we love animals. They're just
Yes.
perfect. Um, but yeah, it's, I want people to get out of that place in their mind where, oh, I've got to worry about, I wonder what frequency I'm in. It doesn't matter. Look and see what's happening with your horse. Is he responding the way you would want him to respond?
That's really good.
And so it doesn't really matter. And that's where it gets into when I say, a lot of people say, well, when I go to teach, you're not very sciencey like I thought you would be. Well, no, I don't want to be that way because you can know that. That's where we're working from. The fact that we know that this is the foundation from which we're working and that that's why it works. But I want you to let go of all that and get into your feeling body when we're with the horse
It's
and
so
your
good.
intuition. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, and there was a section in there where you were listing the different feelings that go with the different waves, brain waves, is that?
Yeah.
Okay. And that there are certain waves that horses respond positively to, and then certain ways that they don't. And there were certain things like anger, frustration that we all would go, oh, of course, that's going to
Yeah.
fall into that. But I think, I can't remember, it was like problem solving, that went in there. And I was like, wait a minute. And it's exactly what you're talking about, where if we're being analytical, we're trying to think through things, and we're with our horse at the same time, we might not have the greatest results. And that just really kind of stunned me. And then it also reminded me of something. So I was a Pirelli instructor for several years. And one of the things that Pat used to say was to do our thinking at night and our feeling during the day. And it's that same concept. So it kind of hit me that, oh, wow, that's kind of where that's what that is.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, it gets back to, kind of the end of my talk at the summit. It was weird because I was in that place where I didn't have a script and I was kind of doing my talk. I knew what topics I was going to touch on, but I didn't plan out exactly what I was going to say. And then it was interesting because I looked at the clock. They had a little timer for your 20 minutes. I'm like, oh, I still have like a minute and a half. And then like in my brain, it's going, well, what do you say in a minute and a half? And then all of a sudden it came up about Hugh Lofton, who wrote the book, Dr. Dolittle.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, why did that, so here I am in the middle of my talk, like, Dr. Dula, so this is all going through my mind. It's like,
Right.
no, I'm supposed to say something about this. What is significant about Dr. Dolittle? Oh, maybe Hugh Lofton knew about communicating with animals. Maybe he was trying to tell people that they should do little
Oh.
instead of, because I go, well, he didn't name his character Dr. Dumore. He named him Dr. Dolittle. So it gets
Ooh.
back to that thing where I think he was trying to tell us what we're talking about now. Do less, not more. Be quieter.
Hmm.
Be in that space there. Don't be analyzing. And I think that, it's so interesting when, because I talk about the whole idea of intuition and connecting to our intuition, and it was one of those things where I'm in the middle of this talk and my intuition's going knocking, hey, remember Dr. Dolittle? I'm like, shut up. I don't know I'm in the middle of, like, in front of all these people. I don't, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, well, that does have relevance. So I just love that whole idea, like, where I'm trying to help people connect with those spontaneous things that come in and you go, I don't know what that is, but I'm just going to go with it.
Right.
Where's this taking me?
Right.
Instead of me analyzing and going, I'm going to analyze my speech down to every word I'm going to say. And then what does it sound like? It sounds rehearsed.
Right.
And so much of what we do with horses is here's our formula, here's our rehearsal. Let's do it this way instead of feeling the free form
Right.
and that freedom of expression, and things could come up that would be even more wonderful than you could
Right.
create.
Right. Well, that brings me to a question. Where do you feel that skills come in? Like, riding skills, the skills that do take repetition, how does that fit with what you're talking about with the intuition and listening to yourself? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I
Okay.
think it's really, I mean, from what I know about you and where you've gone as an instructor and how many skills you have to have, you know,
Sure.
and I'm really thankful for the time that I spent acquiring those basic skills. I think they are so fundamental because what they do is give you this ease of I can handle this situation. I have a skill set to handle what might come up, and I know I'm going to be able to deal with that. So I think it's critical that people have a skill set with horses.
Right.
But how we apply that skill set, I think what I would do differently from when I was originally taught the skill set, there was a lot of like tension in them. And it's like, do this, do that. I noticed that when I started a horse after I'd done more of this, that there was an ease in my body. There was never any place where it came up where I have to make him do this. And the fact that I acquired the skill sets for the mental part of it, the emotional part, combined with the physical skill set is what I think propelled it to a different place. So
That
I would say each is equally important.
Yes. And I think that what you just said there really a big light went on for me that, I have put so many years and hours into developing these skills, and there's still so far to go, right?
Yeah.
But the part of the mental aspect, the emotional aspect, the things that you're really helping people with, I have put time into that, but it still feels new. All
Mhm.
these things still feel kind of new, like these new skills, these new things. So I think that that's so, it's so wonderful that you're bringing this, because I do think in the horse world that it's common knowledge that, of course you need to practice your riding and you need to practice all of these other skills, but not so much the other part. It's becoming more prevalent, like we
Yeah.
talked about in the beginning, but it's still, I just, and maybe it's just me, maybe it's just in my journey that it's new, but the concepts that you're talking about in your book, I just feel like every horse owner of any discipline will benefit
Yeah.
from practicing these things. Um,
But, you talk and it's funny because I work with athletes too, kind of in between and whether it was horses or any other sport. But I noticed that it's not just the horse world where they've kind of dismissed this idea of the other, the mental part of it. It still seems to be a really new concept for a lot of athletes.
yeah,
And I find that really surprising because they go, "Oh, I've got a lot of talent. I don't need to work on my mental game."
right.
Hmm. Well, your physical talent only goes so far, and the mental game is actually more important because that's
Absolutely.
when your all your physical skills go to tank when you're stressed out
Right,
in competition. And that person who has a stronger mental skill set is going to win during
right,
that time.
right.
And that's kind of where I feel like it's so important with the horses is that we have this mental skill set of stability because
Mhm.
I don't like to use the word leadership necessarily, but for me, a horse, if I am mentally focused and I'm stable and I can hold whatever it is in chaos, they're more likely to say, I'd like to be next to her because they're going to go, I'm going to wait, she's not reacting. Wow, she's the
Right,
lead,
right,
right?
right.
And they're going to look to me when they get into trouble.
Mhm. Yeah, that's great.
So,
Yeah, really, really good. So, is there anything that now that the book is, when did the book come out? I forgot to look.
I published it in 2019. It was
Okay,
written a couple years before that, but
okay.
it kind of sat for a while with,
Yeah, sure, as they do,
yeah.
right?
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
So it's
let's
been
just
a
say
few years.
2018 when it was in its formative time.
Okay. So are there something that you would include now
Oh my God. It's really interesting that as I go around teaching clinics, people go, but this isn't in your book. This isn't in your book. This is, and there's just so much that I would, in fact, I think about writing another book or a handbook or something to that effect because there's so much more to this. When I wrote Sacred Spaces, I felt like it was kind of like this gentle introduction to like this other concept, and I better not get too far out there or put too much in it,
Hmm.
or because then it would be just a waste of time. What if nobody listened to it or was interested?
Right.
But now, I mean, there's just so much more about a lot of techniques that I might use to get us into certain brainwave states or
Right.
relaxation and all of that. Plus, there's this huge piece of it that I talked about at the very beginning about that effect of trauma on the body, whether it's trauma in the human or trauma experienced by the horse, and how that can influence the relationship and what you do, how you identify trauma or emotional problems in a horse, and what you can do about them.
Right.
So that is, so many people call me, it's like, I've done all the things you talk about and I'm not making progress.
Hmm.
Well, that's because this horse has a lot of trauma. And
Hmm.
so it cannot do those things. It cannot hear you. Just think about people who are, if they're very traumatized and you're trying to tell them something and it's like talking to a wall.
Right.
They don't hear you. The
Right.
same thing is happening with these horses. They learn to dissociate in a similar way to humans, and they just block you out.
Hmm.
There's nothing you can do. So you've got to go in and do something about that situation first
Right.
before the relationship can change or things can happen.
Right.
So that would
So,
be a whole nother entire book,
right.
probably.
Right. Yeah. So I'm sure that there are many people, well, including me, that would love it if you wrote another one. Um, but so if people are hearing this, you're resonating with them, how can they learn with you? Like how do people go about maybe taking the next step and learning more of these techniques?
And right now I do um, private one-on-ones. I can do them virtually through Zoom. So they can go on my website, which I guess I can give you. It's just www.drsusanfay.com. So it's very simple.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah.
And I'm hopefully in the next couple of weeks, I'll get a scheduling app on there so that you can just go in and schedule a time. So
Great.
you can do those virtual sessions with me in the summers, spring, summer to fall. I do a lot of clinics around the country.
Wonderful.
And a lot of times, what I've been doing is I'll do maybe a demo clinic and then work with people individually after that and just stay in an area and go to that person, one on one, because that's
Okay.
really the way you learn this the best.
Okay.
Um, and then I'm hoping to I keep promising people this. One day I will get an online class going. So that's
Wonderful.
on my winter schedule is like, get yourself going and get that done.
Right. Yeah,
So,
wonderful. That's
yeah.
that's great. Well, I want to just say a huge thank you to you for writing the book,
Oh.
and also for talking with me and sharing a little bit more with folks that are listening or watching. I know that this is going to help some people, and I'm sure that they're going to want to delve further and read the book. It's so good. It's so well written and it's so accessible. I really appreciate that. So thank you very much for coming on today.
Oh my gosh, I can't tell you how thankful I am for you and everything you do. And I've heard such wonderful things about you. So I feel it honored to be on your podcast here.
Oh,
So
thank you
thank
so
you.
much. I hope you enjoyed that conversation, and I hope you're also inspired to check out Dr. Fay's book. It is fabulous. Actually, it was quite a while ago that I had this conversation with her, and after watching it again, I want to revisit the book. I love what Susan shares with us about the changes that we can make in ourselves. And it got me thinking that that can be really inspiring to know that really most of the problems that we have with our horses, most of the challenges that come into our lives, boil down to us needing to make a change. And that can be inspiring, like I said, but sometimes it can be really daunting too. And I just find it really helpful to remember that it's the small changes, it's the little things that we do day in and day out, whether we're with our horses or not, that can make a big difference over time. So if it feels daunting to you, just remember, make one small change today, and then tomorrow show up and try it again. So I hope you enjoy this conversation, and I'm really glad that you're here, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.